Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, what a week, not exactly for EVE itself, although we got a little bit of news on what CCP is doing for the game. In fact, I did join a cool mass test as well this week, but what it's about, well, we get the jump effects back and I must say on CC for the moment they look very smooth and very cool. It really does keep me immersed in EVE Online now on jumps, whereas, well, at the moment on TQ, a jump is like a short break where I look on another screen, so definitely very interesting. And then the other one is that there will be a sort of a fleet finder within the agency that's coming that should allow you to basically find fleets very quickly, but also create and show that your fleet is up and running with a certain activity. It's interesting. I do think that it will increase visibility of people that want to run public fleets. Will it have a lot of success? That'll kind of depend on how the player base engages with that feature, of course. And then what I was actually talking about outside of EVE Online, I'm pretty sure that if you watch EVE Talk, you know about this as well, but it's that Wall Street bets versus the hedge funds on Wall Street stuff. I don't want to delve too deep into that, but looking at it from an EVE Online perspective, I think is absolutely fascinating. Now, since I do touch on this topic, I'm going to say, well, I do work in the financial industry. I'm like really a low-level guy, so I'm absolutely not an expert in any of this, especially not when it comes to the market, real-life markets and things like that. So, all of this is just purely opinion. But I do think it is very cool, and one thing that I believe here is that you can see very strong correlations here between the EVE Online market and like RuneScape, I think it is. I saw screenshots of people were in training for all of this in those real sandbox MMOs, and I think that that's absolutely touches on something, is that we all tend to believe that the real life markets are like a real market, like an open market, a free market where everyone plays by the same rules, and really what this is all about to me is seeing how this will end and if that's true or not, and if the rule of law, you could say, tends towards making everything equal, or if it's there for the rich elites that take advantage of the system. And on that front, maybe one more thing that I think is that if you look at the EVE Online economy, sure, right, we've got rises and crashes in this market as well, but we don't have, in my opinion, that same type of bubble behavior, because the EVE Online sandbox adheres to the free market rules a lot more than in the real world. And what's the difference? Well, the difference is that if you want to leverage any of your bets, if you want to take risks, right, nobody is going to come in here and say, well, the other side is wrong. There is no justice system. If you want to leverage, you need trust in the other party, and that trust can be broken, and then the consequences are for you if you misplace the trust. And there's also no real way to create a massive debt spiral, because everything you put in, you actually have to own. So except that, well, that one old skill, of course, in the market that allowed for the one scam where people would end up in places they didn't want to, which is that margin trading skill, which CCP actually has removed in a rather controversial sense, because it did lower volatility a little bit. It did lower the transactions and the ability for people to do lots of trading on a smaller wallet. But yeah, it's closer, in my opinion, to a real free market where if you want to put up, right, you have to show that you have the means to do so, and that is something that what I'm seeing, I'm gonna say in the markets in real life at the moment, is that pure gambling behavior is basically enabled by interventions from governments, from central banks and things like that, that basically pump massive amounts of liquidity into the markets, that basically allows for these types of situations where, for instance, a stock can be shorted in larger amounts than actually are able to be traded, which of course is something that in EVE Online, for instance, would never happen, because every ISK has to be made by the players and has to be then put up and taking the risk that you want to do within a market. Same thing with the other side of the equation in EVE Online. Of course, the goods as well are all produced by the players. So that's a very big difference, and I think it is absolutely fascinating. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in hearing more of my opinions on that. Honestly, I follow a couple of YouTubers on this, like Louis Rossmann. I think he's like a New York repair guy who actually talks in the same way that I would be, I think, looking at it, and it's absolutely fascinating. But I definitely think that there's better voices out there than mine. But let me know in the comments if you kind of want me to talk a little bit more about that, and perhaps as well about my views on how the EVE Online sandbox compares to the real life situation that happens there. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and it definitely goes through my mind a lot when you're seeing all of that hubbub and it making the news, and these Wall Street hedge funds that have taken all of these, well, borderline gambles, these massive gambles with enormous amounts of risk, in fact almost infinite risk when it comes to short selling, that are now taking it in the teeth and are looking at massive losses. So that's it for this introduction. Let's move on to the general stuff here. We still have to take a quick look at the New Eden store. We're here for EVE Online, of course, and let's take a look here. We got some bundles front and center. I'm not seeing any sales here. Quick look at the services, and that all looks regular as well. That means that we can move on to our market, our little market, the EVE Online market, and we'll start with plex and stuff, and that is at 650. Like that. All right, and we can see that plex is going down a little bit more, breaking through the 2.5 million mark on the chart for the daily averages and even the 5-day moving average. Pretty interesting that we're still seeing that pressure. And if I take a look at the JITA prices, just above 2.5 million, well, just above 2.55 million for the first sellers, 2.45 million basically for the buyers, and that's 2.5 million being the halfway point in JITA. If that's where most of the trade would be happening, we'd actually be looking at dumping to these buyers at the moment. But let's take a look at the player-owned trade hubs. They go down a little bit when it comes to the buyers, to 0.545 million. So competition is quite heavy between those trade hubs to jump out and JITA itself. And then those buyers go up to 2.463 million. So in order to get these average prices, you do need to see more action, more volumes normally going to these buyers, which means that people are at the moment apparently dumping their plex to the market. Why? Well, I'm not really sure. Prices going down here. I think perhaps more fears of a little bit of deflation with CCP not showing any signs that well, we're going to increase ISK availability this way or that way. It might still be nerfs. For instance, I still am looking out for news on incursions that have basically overtaken on some periods of times the ISK from radding, which well, perhaps is not what CCP wants. That may be a little bit too exclusive for such a big ISK faucet at the moment. So plex prices still under pressure, getting very close to the 1-year low point. The multiple pilot train certificate following suit, of course. If you can get 30 days Omega time for 500 plex at a cheaper price, your multiple pilot train certificate inevitably has to follow as well. Less than 1.3 billion for the sellers and just above 1.2 billion for the buyers. Very, very narrow margin here as well between sellers and buyers. So there is quite a bit of competition actually on both sides, but it looks like for now a little bit of panic selling may be happening, you could say, where the sellers are willing to dump a lot at these buyers that have that narrow margin. So it's an interesting situation. We have a lot of sellers and we also have a lot of buyers apparently. After that, we have the skill extractor that also correlates very strongly with plex, showing that same pressure at the tail end and actually reaching pretty much the 1 year low point on its chart. We're talking 288 million for the sellers, 285 million for the buyers. Again, a 3 million ISK margin pretty much for something that costs almost 300 million is very, very low. So there is definitely, a lot of activity around this price point with, I would say, I mean, this is my opinion, I'm not like a big expert, but with a decent amount of players on both sides, some believing that we're reaching the bottom and we should be buying. So you're seeing these buy prices get very, very close to those sellers, but still a lot of people, taking the other side of the bet, saying, I think we could go even lower. I better sell now. I'd better try to monetize and get into liquid ISK right now, rather than skill extractors, plex, and training certificates. The impact on the injectors should not be too good. I think we got another week where we got easy daily challenges for more skill points. So I think those are basically pretty much very available for all of the players. And here you can see on this 1 year chart that we're again heading for a 1 year low point, staying below 650 million with a little bit of a bounce, but here at the tail end just not helping. Back down to 638 million for the sellers, 614 for the buyers. Again, really narrow margin here between sellers and buyers, and the average prices in the last couple of days definitely at the low end of the spectrum. So if you are of the opinion that at some point we're gonna go back up, this is your chance to buy very close to 614 million, because these average prices show that people are willing to sell to those buyers. Then we have the small skill injectors right here that actually have yet to fall back down. So that is also kind of interesting in my opinion. We had a 1 year low point when we went below 130 million. We made our way back above that, and the market is saying no, for these small scale injectors, well, we're not dumping to 124, we're trying to sell above 130 million ISK. Now there is some competition here, right? Quite a few sellers, 131, 30.9, 0.8, 0.7, 0.6. So the competition is here, and it's good break, right? If a couple of sellers come in and say 129, I want to get rid of this stuff, but still get that little bit more than the 124 here for these buyers, or 120 for the next one, etc., then we could dive down very quickly. But for now, this market is saying no, we're not dumping to those buyers. We are gonna ask our 130 million for the sellers. We'll have that patience. So unlike with the large scale injectors, I think having or grabbing a small scale injector below 130, especially at the like 120, 124 range, is very difficult compared to the large scale injectors, which is interesting, again showing that difference between large and small scale injectors, despite the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, you just take a large scale injector and create a number of small scale injectors. But overall, very interesting, definitely depressed close to 1 year low points, but a different dynamic here in the market from what I'm seeing. The daily alpha injectors showing their opposite effect, actually a big volume spike here, pushing the price back up above 45 million on average, 46 for the sellers, 41.5 for the buyers. Here again, sellers dictating the price for now, as players are forced to go to these, and no one is dumping the daily alpha injectors to those buyers, or next to no one, you should say, at the moment. And then after that, we still have the hypercore left that is continuing its downward spiral to a 1 year low point, well below 280 at this point, 263,000 for the sellers, 252 for the buyers. Volumes are still up quite a little bit, so perhaps, if I'm not mistaken, this big spike here was like a special situation, maybe a sale or something where you could use the Hypernet relay at like a massive discount or something like that. Perhaps like this needs to still be absorbed by the market. It's definitely a unique type of item that has correlation with plex and real life money, but is really used in a super niche thing, mostly here in Jita, basically, where players are trying to sell stuff through the Hypernet relay, through the raffle system. So if you're looking at this as a gauge for general activity in the game, I'm not sure that that's exactly correct, but I did tend to look at it like that because of that summer slump that we saw here and that recovery after the summer. But don't take that as gospel. There's definitely other factors at play here as well. But overall, I would say that we're seeing kind of deflationary fears in the EVE Online economy. You can see plex going to a one-year low point, despite the fact that we're basically primed for CCP announcements. And if it's cool stuff, you would think that we might start to see some speculation on plex going back up towards the summer. We're normally in high activity this winter and things like that. So it's interesting to see that the nerve to ratting, I think, has put the market on edge when it comes to inflation expectations. Next up, we've got the minerals. Those are coming in at 15 minutes. Like that. And let's take a look at this one here. We've got titanium landing on the 6 ISK and actually up a little bit from last week. As we go to the GTAP prices, 627 for the sellers, 601 for the first buyers. This is the one dangerous thing here. Now it's still for 50 million, 60 million units, but we get 153, another 97 here. If those buyers really start to push down below 6 ISK, I mean, it could happen. It's definitely decent volumes that are coming to the market and that are competing the price down. So that would be interesting. That would mean for me that titanium goes back to a well below average price where I would personally not be willing to sell anymore. If it's below 6 ISK, that's a no-go. Up to 7 ISK, right? That's that in between spot 6 to 7 where it's definitely still okay to sell. But the lower you go, the more likely it is that I would say hoarding at least a bit of your mining makes sense at that point as well. And once you get above 7 ISK, you're in the no-brain zone from the historical perspective, I would say, where sell what you mine. You're getting a nice return on your efforts at that point. And at the moment, it's clearly under pressure, despite the fact that we saw this big escape, I think it was in M2 from the opponents of the Imperium, and they actually managed to get a lot of their Titans out, if I'm not mistaken, but at the cost of a huge amount of Dreadnoughts. And so you would think that perhaps we would see a mineral spike because of that, but that's not showing up here, at least not yet. It has stalled the descent though. Titanium clearly stalling its descent. Here is Pyrite next. That one is also stalling its descent. It was going well below 20 ISK here, but now we're basically flat for the week at almost 19 ISK for the sellers and 17 ISK for the buyers. And then next up here we've got Mexelon that was actually building yet again to another higher plateau. Very, very impressive. Of course, Mexelon, your focus if you're mining in high sec, you definitely want to find that and sell that at the moment. I mean, you're getting the best price in a year. You're getting close to the best price ever. This is now definitely in super high demand at the moment. A little bit of pressure at the tail end here. We're talking 135 though for a single piece of Mexelon and 126.7 for the buyers. That's a very narrow margin here for something that is this expensive. So there is super strong demand. Definitely your focus, I would say. Next up, we have the Isogen market that is pulling its way back up above 40 ISK here as well. We're talking 43 for the sellers and 38 for the buyers. And the bad news is we still have 2 billion units coming in here at 45. So if that's not a massive old stock that is brought to the market, then I don't know what it is. It's actually brought to the market a while ago, but 2 billion units, I mean, that's in the current situation. I don't see you having mined that in like the last 30 days or something like that. This has to be old stocks that are keeping things in check. Now, we never actually really reached that, I guess, because it's super noticeable. I think if you look at compare that to Mexelon, where you don't see a single volume above 10 million, right? And knowing that you normally get more Mexelon in bigger volumes and more easily, certainly, than Isogen at the moment. I think this is, again, for me, a reconfirmation that the Isogen's problem is still inertia from all of that bonanza period where it was by far the overmined, overcreated mineral in the game, and the fact that there's still 2 billion units waiting here, and that will keep the price from rising above 45 ISK in any substantial way, is of course pretty massive. So that's a stock that needs to be chewed through the economy, through destruction, through consumption, and that is still going to take a while. So that's interesting. This is super pronounced. I think it's going to be the biggest one volume order that we'll see in the entire mineral market. And this being in Isogen, I mean, we are talking about old stocks, and we are talking the reason why Isogen is not in the same ballpark as Mexalon, for instance. It should be higher in my opinion. We will see, of course, if there's still that much stuff out there that players are able to dump 2 billion units in a single order, then this will take a while. This could take a very long while, in fact. Then we've got the Noxium market that is working its way back up above 1250. Clearly a bit of a turnaround from last week. 1300 for the sellers and 1200 for the buyers. Very expensive as well, of course. Very impressive 5-fold performance since the start of the year. And yeah, you need to go to low-sec, probably some sources in null-sec as well, in order to get that. But it's getting you a nice return if you manage to do it, of course. After that, we've got Zydrine that, actually dumped. Man, that's a sharp move on that 5-day moving average. As we reached 1500 ISK, we actually now are down to 1432 for the sellers, 1300 for the buyers. That's a pretty wide gap opening up here. Again, quick look at the volumes. 1 to 2 million, 3 million is the biggest order, so that follows suit, right? These volumes go down as the price goes up, as it's harder to get these types of minerals. So that does make sense. The 5-day moving average here doesn't really make sense considering what we're seeing here. So I think we'll have to wait last week. I'm actually at 1430. We're definitely still in the very high range here for the market for these sellers, and honestly, I don't see a lot of dumping happening for Zydrine. Who the hell is going to do that? So I think here, this bit of the charts, 5-day moving average, 20-day moving average, has a little bit of a mistake in it. That's my read on it anyways. We'll see next week. After that, we still have Megasite flat at 600. Currently 612 for the sellers, 611, 612 for the buyers. That's a narrow margin if we've ever seen one. Volume wise, a little bit stranger, 6 million, 4 million. So slightly higher than Zydrine. Now, not in the amount that I would say it's worth half of Zydrine, but for some reason, I guess consumption of Megasite is pretty low, is a lot lower than Zydrine in industry, and as a result, yeah, these stocks and whatever supplies can actually keep that price in check very easily. So here, the big difference between the Megasite situation, where you would say should be in same range as Zydrine, is that it is used a lot less in production of stuff, but what we're not seeing is like 50 million units or something like that in a single sell order, which for the Isogen market you're still seeing. So I wouldn't say that the price of Megasite being that much lower than Zydrine is because of old stocks. It's probably just because it's needed a lot less and probably produced perhaps even slightly more than Zydrine at the moment. And then finally, of course, we get our Morphite chart that I think any investor would love to see, and might look like a bubble, right? Might look a little bit like a bubble. This could be a Tesla stock, this could be a GameStop stock a little bit with all these steps up, although you'd have to replace months probably with days or weeks in order to actually get a similar chart. But this is super impressive, of course. Below 12,500 here in October, and then in 1, 2, 3, 4 months we are up to 77,000 ISK for the sellers and 70,000 ISK for the buyers. But again, the big difference here, is this a bubble? Well, it's definitely not a speculative bubble. There's no way to leverage your ISK or the Morphite on this equation, right? All the Morphite that's on the market exists, has been created by the players, and all of the trades that happen, so all of this at these prices, is ISK that was in and is in players' wallets. So it's not like it's short selling in the future. You're not borrowing someone's Morphite to rebuy it later down the line. None of these shenanigans exist, at least directly within the system. I mean, between players, something like that can happen. But of course, we all know that in EVE Online, if you do that, right, if you're going to give someone a huge stock to borrow in more fights so they can speculate on that, if they say, I'm not paying you back, that's it, right? There's no court of justice that's going to say, hey, that's not fair. You know, it's purely trust based in EVE Online, which means that it's a lot less volatile, because not that many players are going to take stupid risks when there's no one out there that's going to wag the finger at someone who lied to you and who took whatever it is that you gave them. So very, very interesting, right? This may look like a bubble, but here in Morfight, it's not a bubble. It's just, you know, the higher price of the new economic reality in the EVE Online sandbox. Next up, we've got the PI segment coming in at 24.50. Like that. And then of course, when we get big gains, because this is you know, a sandbox economy, in one category we do tend to see some depression in other categories. And of course, as we all know, while the minerals had gone up over the last year, the PI materials have suffered a lot. Even before this chart they were already in trouble, but then of course here in October we got this massive decline up to January. Now for broadcast nodes, you do see that a bottom may be forming, right? Some people are, look at these volumes for instance, starting to take their positions. This is of course the speculation part that does exist in EVE Online, right? I read this as speculation that CCP is going to come out with news. We got those hints that they're looking at smaller structures for individual players that have an impact on their surroundings. And of course, you know, there is speculation that advanced PI materials will be needed in the production of that type of stuff. Also smaller, so even cheaper, but also with more destruction, but at least in such a way and such a cost range, I think, that you could actually see real consumption in those types of structures. And as a result, look at that, a very impressive rise from around 900,000 disk up to the current 1.3 million for the sellers of broadcast nodes, almost above 1.2 million as well for the buyers. So the market has moved up in both sellers and buyers on this one. That is definitely for now a structural change. It may be built on speculation, but yeah, these broadcast nodes that are being produced are definitely getting a better price than a month ago, and the market is willing to put more ISK into advanced PI, at least in the broadcast nodes for now. Then we get construction blocks here. You can see that hesitation, and then here in November again moving to a very clear lower range, slight upswing in the last week, but it's still very shallow. 8,000 for the sellers, 7.3 for the buyers, for something that, in my opinion, construction blocks 11,000 average is correct. Then we have the consumer electronics actually going to a new 1-year low point for consumer electronics. Again, look at that start of the chart, well above 10K, currently selling for 6,500, and buyers are non-existent for this one, 5,800 ISK for consumer electronics. The fuel ones have had a steadier slope, but also very, very punished. There is this one difference, as I've said here, for instance, for consumer electronics, right? This was already a bad place. I think 12.5 and above is actually a normal average for consumer electronics before the last year, 2 years almost, I would say. For the fuel-related PI materials, they were actually doing really well in this period. So 11.5 for almost 12,000 ISK here actually at the start of a year ago. For coolants, actually a very high price, because this is easy to produce on gas planets. But thus the punishment over the last year has been that much steeper for it, and it's right now at its worst place pretty much ever that I've seen. 6,000 ISK for the sellers, 5.8 for the buyers. Very cheap, lost 50% of its value over the last year here. Of course, right now it's not in a great spot, because fuel consumption is probably down with how much harder it is now to maintain structures, the extra cost of the core, which makes it more attractive for war decks. Everything is together now for very low fuel prices, and there's also low demand for these types of PI materials. Cryoprotectant solutions doing quite well as well, in contrary to almost everything else. So here, if I then go to industry, and we had being produced for implants, so there are these exceptions. I'm actually going to mention this as well. I received an Eve mail from someone where I said nanites is not used in implants. That is not correct, because it is actually used in a planetary good. I think it was this one, the transcranial microcontroller. That is then used in more implants. And so my read on what the upswing for nanites meant was actually correct. But so let's just keep that in mind. I made a mistake. I thought, well, look at what nanites is used for. So it's all nanite repair based. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. No, it is actually used in a further step within PI that is then linked to the implants. So this is the chart that you're seeing here, March, April. On the release of a new implant set, there is a lot of need for that, right? People want to jump on those new implants, and as a result you can make quite a bit of risk on that. I would look to buy cryoprotect solutions below 100,000 disc to be ready for that, and right now buyers are at 97,000, sellers at 116. So if you want to be ready for a CCP announcement that, for instance, they are bringing out a photon projector implant set, then that's what you want to make those purchases for at the moment. It's a little bit of speculation, but I do think that eventually they'll want to get the photon projector in the game as well, same way that the disintegrator for the triglavians are. So that's a speculation that you know, I'm gonna look at the best buy opportunities, hoping that will happen. Enriched uranium tied to fuel, so we get this big downtrend over the last year, of course. 8,000 disc, less than 8,000 for the sellers, 6,400 for the buyers, still going down even more. And then integrity response drones back above 1.5 million and trying to stay there. That's unlike a lot of the other upward swings that we saw. For instance, I think in broadcast notes it was very noticeable here, up and then down even lower, up a little bit, down even lower, up, down even lower. Now it does look like we are in a different spot. Integrity response drones has above 1.5 million for the sellers, but also almost 1.5 million for the first few buyers. So that demand has come back. Those buyers are willing to pay that higher price. Mechanical parts are, well, pulling up from a one-year low point below 6,000 discs, 6.8 for the sellers, 6.5 for the buyers. So that's a little bit of a bounce from a super low point like this one, but not necessarily structural. Nanites, as I've said, was below 5,000 disc, made its way back above that. Actually, we're running out of that in JITA. Is there available in the trade hubs? Not really. 8,000 now for the sellers, but buyers are not budging. They're below 5,000 discs. So again, on the nanites front here, we have that same March-April increase. Well, that is because it is tied to implants, unlike last week where I said, I don't understand it then. Why is it only repair based? But it's not. So let's keep that in mind. That was a mistake on my end. Nano factories flat at 750 as 750,000. So not all advanced PI materials are seeing an increased demand here. 790 for the sellers, 712 for the buyers. Still very low basically. Organic mortar applicators, more of a dead cat bounce. If we look at this one, went down to 600,000 disc, is now at 670, buyers at 635. That's still very low. Recursive computing module, alright, definitely up from the one-year low point. Here, you could still ask that question. We've been up like this to 1.25 million before on big volumes, but we were driven back down below a million. And then we had our second leg up, which at the moment is looking at 1.27 million, almost 1.3 million for those sellers and above 1.1 for the buyers. Still not very comfortably, I would say. I think broadcast notes looks a lot more structural than this one. Robotics also bouncing up from a low point. I'll quickly drink here before I lose my voice. Like that. So robotics up a little bit, but again this feels more like it could be another bounce. That'll be punished very quickly. 64,000 for the sellers, 60,000 for the buyers. Self-harmonizing power core still bouncing around off of that 1 million range. There's really not much to say on this one. Sterile conduits, that's exactly what you have to be careful with, right? Went back up to 900,000 disc, is already back down to 750. 824 for the sellers, but 714 for the buyers. So here what we're saying is that there are people willing to dump sterile conduits to these buyers at this low price. Yukomi superconductors, another one tied to implants, a massive spike at the start of that a year ago in February, up to 250,000 ISK, currently going for 72.69 for the buyers. I would love to be able to buy that below 50k, doesn't look like that's going to happen. Another one of those where if you want to be ready for an announcement on implants, you could look at slowly buying those. And then we get wetware mainframes that, well, is moving out of that bottom range, went to a million ISK, started the year at 2.2 and is currently selling for 1.3 million, buyers just below that. So this also looks a little bit more structural, but it's definitely still at a pretty low range as well. Next up, advanced wound materials at 34.45. Let's take a look at what we can see here. So the general trend that I've been seeing is volatility in Caldari, a bit of volatility in Galente, then even less volatility in Minmatar, and then Amar basically moved to that lower range and is stuck there for now, or up until last week. So let's see what's happening with crystalline carbonate for Galente production of Tech 2 stuff. Back down well below average. We're talking 134 for the sellers, that's pretty cheap, 127 for the buyers. So I would say fresh supply has crashed the price below average, but it's been here before and it could make a comeback, of course. Then we have our Caldari for carbide. Here is titanium carbide. All right, here is the volatility. Actually went to a 1 year high point, apparently trading for almost 250 on a day at 241. That's very high, still going for 175 for the sellers and 165 for those buyers. Definitely at the high range for titanium carbide, and that's a massive breakout all of a sudden in the last week. A little bit unexpected. It managed to keep climbing as it looked like it was just going to the higher part of the range, so that's pretty massive. It is closed very quickly, but we're still at a very high range for titanium carbide. Then we've got our Minmatar Fernite carbide that does try to get back, try to go back to 150, didn't quite make it. Right before that we had the peaks well above 150 due to the war, two of these at least. But now we're struggling back down to 131 for the sellers, 122 for the buyers. So there is some volatility in the Minmatar stuff, but it's basically bouncing off of 1 year low points of very low prices, keeping the averages well below the normal. And then tungsten carbide for Amar, that's no volatility and just, you know, above 175, above and below 175, and then nope. Let's try to get to 150, and you know, just that 125 to 150 narrow range, very low for tungsten carbide. Then we have the metamaterials. Here is for Galente. I still need to look for that. I really need to get to grips with this segment like this. Photonic metamaterials, all right, climbing their way back above 12,500, at least trying to. 12,270 for the sellers, 11,300 for the buyers. I would say that this is still below average as well, but definitely climbing out of the hole here. A slow crawl back to slightly more normal prices. Then for Caldari, we've got non-linear metamaterials, and that's a lot more volatile, with also clearly us trending back to the old average, I would say, of 22,500, and at the moment you could say that this is definitely feeling like a high price at 23,000 for the sellers, 22,500 for the buyers. Caldari production, volatility, and definitely high prices. Then we've got plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar, and okay, that one is definitely breaking out, so you can see that lower range, that lack of volatility, but at least from time to time we try to get back to a more average 20,000 ISK range. At the moment, 23,000 for the sellers, 21,000 for the buyers. So this gap is this jump is basically being plugged as we speak, but nice to see that we still have that. Now this could be tied to the war, right? This could be because the Imperial Ethereum made another investment, but I'm just not seeing the volumes for that. So it may just be a drying up of the market, driving prices up here all of a sudden. You would think that you would see something like that for a price spike to be related to the war, to be a big null-sec entity investment or something like that. It's basically a drying up here, causing the price to spike, which is good news if you're looking for that volatility towards the Tech 2 ships. And then we have terahertz metamaterials for Amar, and that's the bad news, of course, right? First, we get steady above 20,000 ISK, then we start to see a little bit of volatility, but eventually, right, we break down and we get a low point of 15K, and then a little bit of speculation on, all right, that's really low. No, you were too early. Now we're down with a low point of 12,500. We try to make our way back a little bit, but that pressure is just unstoppable at the moment. 14.5 for the sellers, 13.5 for the buyers. So Amar definitely at that lower range and not showing any signs that volatility will make it back. Then we've got a couple of other advanced move materials where, well, let's take a look if there's trend breaks. We get fermionic condensates that definitely that's slowing or stopping the descent, but is still very cheap. Ferrogel, ooh, all right, a first move up here, interesting. Ferrogel was going for around 30,000 ISK, a little bit above that, and is now, well, 33.5, 31,000 for the buyers. But at least there is a sign of life in some of these. So all of these were generally depressed quite heavily. This is a nice bump that would have been tradable if you bought at the 1-year low points, right? Then you can definitely sell at a profit now. Fullerite's still flat at that low range. Slide up trends though, so bottoms may have been formed. Hypersynaptic fibers also still flat. Nano transistors are at a move up to 5K. Interesting, that's probably the sellers here. Yeah, 4,800. The supplies are coming in very quickly to take advantage of that, but definitely a move up away from that bottom range. So that's good, I would say. Phenolic composites also moving back above 1500, and then ceramic fibers still struggling at its lower range. But all right, the first signs that either some investments are happening or some real drying up and some real need for some of these advanced movements is starting to show up. Let's hope that it's a trend that'll lead to some volatility, because I think we need to see that volatility here in order to get our trade opportunities in the Tech 2 ships, which are next, of course, at 41.15. And yeah, let's take a look at that. So Basilisk, look, that's lovely. Caldari, of course, and kind of confirming that if you're seeing volatility in those equivalent moon materials, you've got some volatility here as well. So about a month ago, you could have bought this for well below 180 million. I think 160 was even on the books, and now they're already selling again at 222 million. Buyers go up to 196. So that's tradable, right? This is lovely. That's a nice chart if you're looking to buy low and to sell high. Then we get the Cerberus, also same thing, currently recovering from a high point up to 280 million. We're down to 237, buyers are down to 201, but if a bit of supply can crash the price even lower, let's say that you can buy below 200 million, which, well, actually you can buy at 2.1. You can almost buy and sell right now. So that's great, right? This is tradable. This is the volatility that we want to see, of course. Timing the market is next to impossible, but honestly, from time to time, I have been able to buy low and sell high with a profit in between them. Not the very best of profits. I tend to buy decently well, but sell too early. But overall, I do feel that it is possible. Then we've got the Guardian, which is Amar, and so that's a completely different chart, completely lacking in volatility. Currently selling for 177, buyers are at 164. Now, I will say this. If we see volatility start to come back in advanced movements, I'm not really sure what that's going to take. Then, of course, investing now from time to time, slowly and steadily in some Amar Tech 2 ships could become very, very juicy when all of a sudden something like this or like that would happen, because you are at the moment in all likeliness buying very close to those low points. Then we've got the Hound that, well, is trying to get back into a bit more volatility. So I would say it's good, but it is Minmatar. And so you do have that lower range. So look for lower bottoms basically in the Hound. Currently 23.5 million for the sellers, 22 million for the buyers. Look at this previous low point here. I would need to see like 18 million or something like that, 18, 19 million for the buyers before I jump in. Then our Iquitursa is flat below 800 million ISK. We're keeping an eye on this Triglavian one for general feeling of Triglavian content, what's happening there. So it's still basically very insular. It does feel like it's been pulled away from New Eden, which I think, I mean, it's the storyline is basically that Triglavians did their thing, they grabbed their own region, and now that's what they've got, and they've basically isolated themselves from New Eden. But they have this contact point now between the Abyss, where they generally live, and New Eden. So they're definitely, if we would ever try to kick them out or anything like that, going to defend that. But they're kind of willing to fall back, and as a result, getting the tech for Triglavian ships is very hard at the moment, and so they're super expensive. The Ishtar is making its way back to 230. That's very nice. 231 million for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. So it does look like here in December, when we reached 180 million for the Ishtar, we should have bought. There was this fear in my mind though, that we were looking at a general Tech 2 crash. But no, that's not happening, and the Ishtar has made its way back towards its regular average. Still at the low end of it, but definitely a nice comeback story here. Then we've got the Manticore, Caldari. Here's the volatility, right? About 1.5 months ago, or even less than that, you could have bought for 20 million and below. Currently selling for 34 million almost. Buyers are up to 28 million. So if you happen to have, let's see, do I have Manticores? No, I have Guardian and I have Hound. So those are the mistakes. But again, these are patterns that I'm starting to learn as I keep an eye on the EVE Online market. And so now looking for volatility, sustained volatility, definitely in these advanced moon materials for certain race products, you could say, products of certain empires, does mean that there is likely going to be volatility in the ships as well. And then if you're spotting low points together with the low points here, buying then can be very, very lucrative. The Munin is up a little bit, could be the explanation for the Minmatar metamaterial going up as well, but is settling very quickly. 225 million for the sellers, 210 for the buyers, so just more volumes, higher price. Not really too speculative, I would say. The Nemesis still has a nicely wavy pattern. It is Galente. Unfortunately, it's not as good as Caldari ones, and so our peaks are basically not high enough to really make the trading happening. But at the very bottom and at the very high points, you do have a slightly tradable situation. At the moment, we're in between, I guess. 25 million for the sellers, 22.5 for the buyers. Yeah, too early on both fronts. Then we get the Oneros. That's nice. It's been a while, but here's a Galente ship that actually breaks out to 1 year high point of 230 million ISK. It's currently selling for 220, 191, and yeah, during this period, which may be the situation for the Amar ships, right? Who knows? You could have bought these for 150 and below, in fact, I think on some days as well. So that's a nice profit, but that one warning I think does hold true, of course. Don't buy like a dozen ships. It's going to be very hard with bigger volumes. Just make these spot trades, but then I do think, right, just like I have one Guardian ready, I bought it too early at 184, but if it happens, if we get an Onero spike there, I can very easily make a profit, which if you buy a dozen Guardians, you're gonna have a harder time. Then we've got the Panther, a little bit of pressure on the price here, heading back to 1 billion, just above that for the sellers and just below that for the buyers. Then we get the Purifier for Amar, yeah, lacking the volatility, 25 million, it's its new range, 29 for the sellers, 24 for the buyers. So to get this type of a chart, I think you need to have a decent amount of dumping to this, and then from time to time actually some people buying a little bit more, but it's just not able to budge the price, despite the fact that here we have a day with double to triple the normal volumes. The price response is really limited. So the Amar ones at the moment, definitely not showing volatility. The scimitar, let's take a look at that. Low point 180, high point 230. Yeah, again, some volatility in the Minmatar section, but definitely moving from a lower range, so it's a lot harder to trade. Currently selling for 215, buyers at 190. That's still a pretty wide gap. Then we get the Widow. Oh, a massive drop-off in the Widow. Are we seeing Caldari volatility all of a sudden show up in its battleship segment as well? That's interesting. Less than $1 billion for the sellers, 825 million for the buyers. And now this is an interesting one. Should you try to grab a Widow below 850 million? If you can do that and then sell above $1 billion, which this entire chart has been at, you're looking at a really nice profit on a single ship, on a single trade. But what's happening here, I would say, yeah, it's interesting. It could happen. Now, again, don't take this as advice or anything like that. I don't want to be someone that all of a sudden starts to move the Widow market as all of you guys try to grab them at as cheap as possible a price. But this is an interesting move that I was not expecting. I was looking for that steady evolution in the battleship because they are the biggest one. The trade numbers are not that high. So generally speaking, I was looking at those as a barometer for the general Take 2 situation, but it may just be that the Caldari segment has become so volatile that it's actually showing up into the Black Ops here, the Widow market as well, and that could be interesting because you could make a lot of risk on that all of a sudden as well. Then we've got the Zealot, Amar, so lower range, lack of volatility, 190 for the sellers, 177 for the buyers. Let's move on to the Take 3 ship market at 50.10. Like that. And so let's see the Confessor. Last week I was saying maybe we can still go higher, but I was no longer sure of that. So let's take a look at the chart. We are going higher. Okay, very, very interesting here. Above 50 million, 55 million now for the Confessor, 47 million for the buyers. There's some supply, but definitely not a lot. And so the story here basically is that I love this tactical destroyer market because these four ships, the Confessor, Hecate, Jackdaw and Zweepel, do basically communicate with each other in a very nice and predictable way, where one ship seeing a big spike starts to draw in a lot of demand, a lot of supply, and then it gives the others some breathing room in order to then also go up in price. And so you do have this decently predictable pattern. And for instance, this one right here, when the Confessor was below 40 million ISK, let's take a quick look at the Hecate. That one was at 50, and then let's look at the Jackdaw. That one was already making its way above 40 million. So this rise here is one that I managed to predict pretty damn easily. Now the second one, of course, that was the gambling part, and I think I said that last week as well, where I think it could happen, but it is really going to depend on what happens supply wise to some of the others. And the reason was that the Hecate did dive down to less than 50 million ISK, and I think had big numbers here, yeah, which is no longer there. I think it had like several hundred ships here all of a sudden as well. Or was that in the Jackdaw? Yeah, it's this 427. And that to me was like, all right, this may just give enough breathing room to keep Confessor supplies high enough, so then it won't happen. But no, supplies of Confessors dried up. Full focus was on the Hecate, and I was still selling at a pretty big premium over the Confessor, of course, and then the Jackdaw as well, which is currently selling for 45 million, and it has drawn all of that supply. And so here we have actually a double jump from the Confessor, becoming, I think, the most expensive one. 55 million for the sellers, 47 for the buyers. It's going to start to draw in supplies at the moment, so do expect that price to go down decently quickly. The Hecate is currently selling for 49 million, buyers are at 44. Supply wise, only one of these ships, so I think this price range is practically defendable now for the Hecate. And then we've got the Jackdaw that is going for 45 million and still has this unfortunately 427 volume order. If that one was not there and was lower, let's say in the 40 range or something like that, I would say the Confessor is going to start to go down and take some supplies. Look at the Hecate price, look at the Jackdaw price. You can expect the Jackdaw to go up towards the 50 million range. So buying at 40 starts to make sense, but this 427 makes me hesitate. I'll be honest on that. It's still a lot of ships, and that could just buy enough time for the Confessor supply to go up and to bring that down below 40 million, 50 million. Same thing with the Jackdaw, that could still then get some of with the Hecate. And so we could actually settle at like maybe 47-ish million or something like that. Take a quick look at the Zwepel, also probably a reason because that one spiked up as well. It's currently selling for 49 million, 47 million for the buyers, but here is quite a bit of steady supply, right? Over half a page in the last 24 hours for the Zwepel, crashing the price back down on that supply, which is, I guess, what gave the Confessor the breathing room to also go back up. We'll have to see. I'm really curious. I do think, of course, the Confessor is going to go back down in price, and the Zwepel is going to normalize very quickly as well. But the real question is, how quickly will the market absorb this volume of Jackdaws? And depending on that, you can expect the price to settle down closer to 45 million on all of them. If that creates enough inertia to bring supplies for Confessor, Hecate and Zwepel, then that's what would happen. If on the other hand we see this drying up very quickly, then it's more likely that we'll see average prices go closer to 50 million. And then of course buying some Jackdaws at 40 million starts to make sense. I wouldn't say that I'm sure of what's going to happen here because of this unusual big volume trade that's still happening in that Jackdaw. But yeah, it's a very interesting market, and this first upswing here in the Confessor was, in my opinion, entirely predictable and just came true. And then the second one, I think, is because of what's happening with the Zwepel here, some unexpected volatility here as well. Then we have the reverse of sides of the coin, you could say, for the Tech 3, which is the cruisers, where I really don't understand the market, can't predict it at all, and it feels like it's actually a manipulated and a gambled market, which you could say, well, again, looking at real life, that's what tends to happen, but with that one big difference of, again, of course, the ships have to be there, the ISK has to be there as well. The Legion is going for 160 million, the buyers are going for 145 million, basically settling at the middle of the chart. For people that may be a little bit new, what do I mean with I don't really understand this market. These low prices back here, these 1 year low prices when the Legion went below 130 million, were happening on next to no supplies. So there were maybe like a dozen ships on the market and ridiculous things like that. And that's when we had these low points. And so here now you're getting these high prices. And I think that was when we had a rather low demand compared to the supply. So it's just a crazy one, which I don't fully understand. And I think it's basically small enough that players with not even such big wallets can completely manipulate this one. So at the moment, we're basically settling in the middle of things, I would say, for the Legion. The Loki is just continuing to hover around the 180 million range. I think generally considered the best Tech 3 cruiser at the moment, so that premium, I think, is normal, also in the middle of things. So when we're reaching somewhat parity between supply and demand, at least then we do go to average prices. But other than that, nothing here feels normal. Here is the Proteus, actually at a high point towards 180 million ISK for the sellers, 159 for the buyers. And again, it's not that many buyers. You would expect this price to be far more under pressure than it is, but no, it's not budging, actually well above average. And then we get Tengu, that is also again going for a very high price at the moment, 193 million for the sellers, 174 for the buyers. At least you're seeing a little bit more buying, but all of it is opportunistic. This is a pretty damn wide margin. And so this one is really one where I have taken one gamble on Loki and Legion that worked out, but I very clearly do this 1 year low point. That's when I buy a single ship and then I wait and hope for a turnaround and that I can unload that one. But I don't do something where I expect, all right, in the next week or 2 weeks I expect this price to go up or anything like that. That to me is completely impossible in this cruiser market. And then we move on to the extra product for the week. It's actually an old request coming in at 58 minutes. It is to take a look at the repair paste. So 5810. Let's write that down. And yeah, repair paste, because it was tied to where is it? Here? Nope. Oh, it's gonna be charges, right? Yep, nanite repair paste. Here it is. And all right, very interesting actually, in the sense that this also has this April-May bubble that we also see in the PI materials for stuff tied to fuels. Now, it may be that this one is actually lagging behind what happened with implants. So we actually had an implant introduction that caused an increased demand for nanites because they were needed in the PI cycles to then make those implants, and as a result, the lower supplies of that PI product caused lower supplies of nanite repair paste, caused increased prices for nanite repair paste. But what's very noticeable at the tail end though is that this one is very low at the moment, below 20,000 ISK for the sellers and 18,000 for the buyers. Definitely very pressured product at the moment, super cheap. So compared to the last year, if you love nanite repair paste, you want it in your ships for PvP ships with overheating and things like that, it is a very useful product. It's also something that is consumed, so there tends to be a steady amount of demand for that as well. It's looking like it's basically in the PI cycle where it's lost a lot of its value, but it tends to go up as well on implant introductions, which makes it very interesting, because this could be like a type of investment that a lot of players would miss, because there is not that direct, all right, implants, it's those PI materials. But yeah, those PI materials then have an impact on the nanite repair paste market, and so this could be that hidden opportunity at the moment you're buying these for less than 20k, if you can stock up on that, and then an implant stuff happens with a lot of competition in that PI segment. But then this is the casualty and you're ready to bounce on that. That could make it very interesting. I'm kind of thinking about that, putting down a little bit of my ISK into nanite repair paste. I think would make a lot of sense. So that's a very interesting suggestion all of a sudden. I like this chart from that perspective. This is pure speculation. This is again not me telling you what to do, but that's an interesting, I think, thread that can be seen from these charts. I could be completely wrong on that, but it's very noticeable. This April bump here, that's also very steady for a couple of months, may just be like a little bit of a forgotten consequence of an implant introduction from CCP. So yeah, thank you very much for that one. Very interesting chart. Perhaps an investment idea is budding here as well. That's gonna be it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.